Had a question recently about how I go about painting buildings. Now I use quite a direct approach, painting straight on with a large brush. I'm using quite a large Kolinsky sable. Now, like I said, I use quite a direct approach, so straight on to dry paper, essentially drawing with the brush. Don't like to use too many pencil marks when doing this kind of thing. This is the reference I'm going to use. It's a thatched cottage in Norfolk. Lovely little old building, lots of charm, lots of character, perfect for this kind of thing. And I'll start out by pretty much mapping out the lay of the land. So drawing straight on to the paper with the brush. I'm inventing a little bit of a path leading up to the cottage there, just an excuse to have something to lead the eye in. So very dilute paint, pretty much just using what's in the palette there, a little bit of palette greys. I've added some raw sienna into it. And so really, very simply mark out the horizon line really, and a little path running in. And now I'll pick up some cobalt blue. I can mix that in with what's there, touch a little bit of burnt umber into that as well, and I'm mixing up a colour for the lightest elements in the roof. A little bit of raw sienna in there as well. So I've got a very warm grey type colour, and so now I'm looking at the rough angle of the roof. It doesn't have to be exact, I'm keeping it very loose. And again, drawing straight onto the paper with the brush. And I think using this kind of method as opposed to drawing it out first with pencil really helps me keep a loose feel that I want. If I'd gone in and did a pencil drawing, it's very tempting to keep within the lines and you end up with quite a tight looking finished painting. So using this method just enables me to keep everything very loose and very kind of free flowing. So marking out pretty much the shape of the roof, cut around where the chimney's going to be there, and bring that angle down. A nice thing about painting thatched cottages as well is that they've got a huge amount of character to them anyway, so you can get away with being, you know, really very loose with it. So now I've marked out that rough shape. I can fill all of that in using the same colour. And so this is a very direct way of painting. It can be a little bit hit and miss sometimes doing this, but I think it pays off really in the end, in the finished painting, more often than not. So I'll go back in and start working back into the land again. I'll mix some cadmium yellow in there, using all the same mixture of paint, just adding to it as I go. So mix some cadmium yellow in, a bit of cobalt blue, and so I've got a little bit of a green colour now. So I can strengthen some of these land areas whilst the paint in the roof dries off a little bit. And now you notice in the course of this painting I'll be moving around quite a lot, waiting for areas to dry. And also these kind of paintings tend to go through a little bit of an ugly stage, if that makes sense. So it all looks quite vague until really the final touches, when you start getting the darks in towards the end, and that really starts to pull everything together. I've dropped a little bit of blue into that path leading up there, bit of a tarmac type colour hopefully by the end of it, but very loosely, really kind of carefree, laying the paint in. Grabbed a little bit of burnt sienna. Mix some of that palette grey in with there as well. Tone the colour down a little bit. And I'll drop that chimney in. Now the paint on the roof has dried. That tiniest little bit now, I can lay this in without it running too much. And again, looking at the rough angle of that chimney, it follows the line of the roof and then comes square, and then it kind of goes over the top where it cuts around to the other side. And again, don't have to be too accurate, but really looking at the overall shapes. Okay, I've dried that first wash off, so I'm going to lay in a sky now, and I'll grab a bit of paper towel and clean some of that paint out there. I don't often do that, but I want some quite bright blue going on in that sky, so clean a little bit of the paint out there. Now mix up a very wet well of blue paint. Now I want the overall feel of the painting to be very loose, so keep that same feel with the sky. So laying it in very quickly, kind of carefree, touch around the edges with some clean water. Mix everything in that well together. And again, drag that all the way down the right hand side, or halfway down the right hand side. And now again, a little bit more clean water and drag that around. So a very loose sky. It doesn't matter if I get a few little blooms and cauliflowers going on, that'll all add to the overall effect. I've dropped a little bit of warmth in there as well with some raw sienna mixed in. And now take a little bit of care to cut around the roof and the chimney. I don't have to be too accurate, I don't have to worry too much about it, because I will be adding another wash into that roof. So again, grab some of that blue in the palette, some of the greys, mix that together. And I can start bringing the sky all the way down. Let's drop some of that grey back into the top there. Now continue that shape down, and you can see there on the right hand side I'm using where the sky comes down to cut around the edge of the building. And drop a little bit more of that grey up into the top of the sky. So very loose sky, a lot of it will be covered over with trees in the finished painting. Okay, I grabbed a little bit more cadmium yellow, mix some cobalt blue in there. Touch a bit of raw sienna in there. And a little bit of burnt umber as well. And now I can lay some of that into the land again. Touch a bit of burnt sienna in there as well, vary the colour. Always vary the mixtures in your greens as much as possible. And I'm always being mindful not to paint any of this too tight, so allowing the brush to do the majority of the work. Bit of cobalt blue, a little bit of light red into that. And I can start building up some shadow on the building now. So vary that mixture, put a little bit of ultramarine in there, a bit more light red. And so as always, looking for variation. I don't want to lay too much of one colour in any one spot really. And now looking at how those shadows fall across the front of the building. And now again, I don't have to be too accurate. I don't have to copy exactly what's in the reference. And so a little bit more blue in laid underneath the eaves there. And I can create the corner of the building just by adding a little bit of shadow. And so by building up layers of shadow and light and dark helps to suggest all the form in the building. And I can bring a little bit of shadow colour down underneath the roof on the left hand side as well. And so really I'm building up layers as I go. Let's drop some burnt sienna in and some cobalt blue. And I can lay a little bit of that in just at the bottom of the building there. And now I think I need to dry that again. Okay, I picked up some cobalt blue and some light red. I can start to add some distance now. So a couple of distant trees, a little bit more cobalt in there. Now bring that over to where that angle of that roof comes down. Take a bit of care to cut around that. So very simply suggested a couple of distant trees. Now I've grabbed some more cadmium yellow, touch some burnt sienna in there, a little bit of cobalt. And I can start working on the hedgerow. Now treating that as one big shape. A little bit more cobalt into that. And same again on the left hand side. One big shape for the hedge. Can drop a little bit of dark back into that while it's still wet. Now by adding that little hedgerow, it's pushed the building back a tiny little bit and we're starting to build up some layers, getting a little bit of perspective going on now. So now I've got some more cobalt blue, a little bit of light red in there as well. And I can bring another wash over the roof now. Touch a bit of burnt umber in there as well. Now I'm looking at the pattern in the roof there at the top. I've always got these little designs in thatched roofs. And so I'm going to suggest that. Now it's quite a complex little shape really, but I'm not trying to copy it at all. I'm keeping that very loose, but really suggesting that there's some little bits of pattern going on there really. And now I'll vary that colour again, a bit more cobalt blue, a bit more burnt sienna. I can bring the roof down over the right hand side a little bit darker. Now, even at this fairly early stage, once you start getting the darks in, things start to take shape. Now continue that dark shadow all the way around, so connecting all the darks together where possible. I've touched a bit more light red in there, a bit more cobalt blue. And now that that area's dried just enough that I can start working back in and leave the tiniest little bit of unpainted in between those two shapes. And now bring that all the way across, essentially filling in that whole shape. And touch the tiniest suggestion of a little bit of dark right over the top of the roof. Make the edge of the roof tiny little bit thicker. Thatched roofs are always very thick. Now I've got some more burnt umber, more cobalt, and there's a little porch there, so I'm going to try and suggest that again as simply and loosely as I can. It's really just a little triangle shape. And so vary that mixture with a little bit of raw sienna. And again, a little bit of everything in the palette. A little bit more light red in there, a bit more cobalt. And so again, same as everything else, very simply suggested, looking at the shapes, squinting my eyes as well when looking at the reference, and then painting the shapes that I see whilst my eyes are squinted. I need to bring a bit more dark across the bottom of the roof there. A little bit more ultramarine. Mixed in with everything on the palette. And touch some burnt sienna in. So actually, let's get this mixture quite dark. And now lay some more darks in at the bottom of the hedge. And so, like I said before, really moving around the whole painting whilst waiting for other little areas to dry. I can then go back in and work on another area. This is a very nice technique to use if you're working out on location. And especially if you haven't got the benefit of having like a hairdryer with you, as obviously you probably haven't if you're out on location. And so working on one area, then moving around to another, wait for an area to dry, and then you can move back in. So I mixed up some more dark, some ultramarine and burnt umber, so I can get that almost black now. It's a very dark, thick paint. I can start getting some of the detail in now. So a very strong dark line underneath the edge of the roof, and just tease a little window shape out of that. And now again, not painting little individual windows. A couple of marks with the brush is usually more than enough to suggest what's going on. And now there's some little arch windows in the building there, and I'm going to try and suggest some of that very simply with a little bit of brown paint. And obviously everything's very loose, so I need to keep the windows loose as well. If I painted them exactly how they were, they'd look really out of place. So nothing more than a couple of little marks. And now wait for that to dry a little bit so I can go back into that dark paint. And again, suggest a little window there at the top of the building. And so same again, a couple of little marks with the brush is enough. Vary these darks again with a little bit more brown, a little bit more blue. Another tiny little window there. And I can start getting some really strong dark shadow type areas now underneath the roof. Be very bold, go quite thick with these marks as well. And now again, bring that all round, connect all the dark shapes together underneath the roof. Now I can work back on the porch again now, that area is dry, so bring some of the little uprights in. Some of the dark marks around the bottom of the building. And now again, really looking at the reference and squinting my eyes. Nice dark shadow underneath the bottom of that porch there. And some little dark marks in the thatch. And quite strong dark down that left hand side. Now these window areas are dried off, so I can work back and put the dark surround around those. And again, keeping it as simple as I can really. And there's a tiny little dark shadow running across the top of that patterned area in the roof. And so suggest that as simply as I can. Just touch a bit more burnt umber into the paint there, and I can suggest the shadow on the chimney as well. And so once I start getting all these shadow areas in, really the building really starts to stand out. So the painting's starting to take shape now. And now the tiniest, again, little suggestion of a dark shadow right across the top of the roof. And a couple of little more marks just around this gable end. Now grab a little bit of everything in the palette again. I'm going to start tying everything together over this side. So there's some quite strong shadow areas underneath the porch and along this whole side of the building really. So I can reinforce some of this now. So using quite a blue-grey mixture. And the light's coming in from the left-hand side, so casting quite a strong shadow. I can get really quite bold there up underneath the roof. And connecting all these shadows together as well. Also taking care, make sure I leave a couple of little unpainted areas as well, little bits of reflected light and tiny little shafts of light where the sun's just managing to catch the side of the building. I've got some more ultramarine, a little bit of burnt umber. Can add a shadow from the chimney. Now, I don't really have to be too literal with any of this. It's obviously very impressionistic, very loose. Now I need a couple of trees behind the buildings. So I'll grab some of that leftover green, brown that's in the palette there. Touch a little bit of raw sienna in. And I don't have to be too literal to what's in the reference. Just bring a very simple tree shape. Now another tree on this left hand side. This helps to close off this area as well over here. Now bring that tree shape down, stick another one there on the right hand side as well, I think a smaller tree. Mix up some slightly darker paint now, some blue and burnt umber. I can drop that in while it's still wet as well. And then again using the bottom of that tree, and that closes off the right hand side of the building nicely there, and it just acts to frame that building. I've got some more blue, some more light red. I can mix that in with everything in the palette again. I can start bringing some shadows across the land now. I think I can probably get away with being quite dark in the foreground. So more blue, more light red. And I'll bring a shadow going all the way across. And now again, this sort of helps to frame the building, helps to push the eye back into the painting as well, close off the foreground with the shadows. Quite a nice little thing to do. And drop a little bit of pure cobalt blue in there as well, while it's still wet. And tiny little bit of red as well. And I'm starting to get the impression that there's some nice dappled light in there. The roof's dry enough as well now, so I can bring a shadow across that. That's with some cobalt and light red, slightly lighter shadow colour across the roof. So bring a shadow of a tree. And again, that helps to push the eye in more into the middle and keeps your eye away from the outside edge of the painting, really, by bringing a shadow in from that left hand side. I can bring that in across the building as well. And now instantly adding that shadow in on the left, it pushes the eye into the focal point really, which is kind of around the corner of the building and the front of the building. I can drop some stronger blue shadow colour under that roof there. Touch a little bit of red into it as well. And get quite a dark shadow around the underneath the porch. So I'm looking at it, we're nearly there. Some burnt umber, a little bit of cobalt blue. I can darken this porch, it needs to be a little bit more in shadow. Now again, a little bit more burnt umber, more cobalt. Let's get some strong dark on this side of the hedge. Now make sure I don't cover it all up, leave some of the lighter areas in there. So again, some ultramarine and burnt umber this time. And again, really strong dark, almost black. And where I put those shadows in, it's still slightly wet as well, so that's softening. And I can allow it to run down into that area as well. I can touch some of that dark down into the grass. Let's mix up some more cadmium yellow and strengthen some of these little areas in the grass now. Got a little bit of washed out, so I'm going to touch some of that in here and there. A few hard edges in the foreground, leading the eye off in towards the building. Okay, now I've switched to a slightly smaller brush, just so I can get the tree trunks in and a few branches in these trees. And again, being as loose as I can, really. Don't want to start tightening up at this stage where everything else is very loose. If I go in and start adding sharp lines and things that look too much like a tree, if that makes sense, then it would probably detract from the rest of the painting. So keep the branches and the tree trunks very loose as well. Really flicking around a few little marks with the brush there. And some very simple little details. Tying everything together, making sure everything's connected. Making sure nothing's standing out on its own too much. And darken a couple of these little shadows. And now a little piece of plastic card. I can pull out a few highlights there in the hedge. Don't want to do too much. Break up a few of the dark shapes just here and there. And I'll take a step back, see if I need anything. I think I need a few more darks, so some more burnt umber and some blue. Get some real strong little dark areas in the land, little tufts of grass. Drop a little bit of shadow in that path as well, a few little marks, maybe a couple of little stones. I have to be very careful at this stage that I don't fiddle around too much and start overworking. Let's get some strong, bold, dark right down in the foreground. I was looking a little bit busy down there in the foreground, so bring a bit of dark across it very simply, and then scratch a couple of little highlights in there. Now again, got to be very careful not to do too much of this sort of stuff. I'm running the risk now of starting to overwork. Okay, that's the painting finished. I'll take the tape off so you can have a little look with the white around the outside. Now, it's a very direct approach to painting buildings, so I don't like to use any pencil drawing. I'll go straight in with the brush with some quite dilute paint, set the lay of the land, and then work on the shape of the roof and get that in. And if I can get that there or thereabouts, I'm pretty much accurate. It doesn't have to be perfect, because we're looking for a loose style painting anyway. But so get the shape of the roof in, shape of the chimney, and then work on the shadows in the building. And then once you get those in place, pretty much starts to take shape, and then you can add some darks, connect everything together, keep windows and doors and any details like that as loose as you can as well. But anyway, that's the painting done, that's the demo finished. So I hope you liked it. Let me know in the comments what you think, and if you've got any ideas or any suggestions, then follow me on Patreon and I take requests over there. So do check that out. There's a nice little community over there, and I bring out a new video every week, so take a look at that. And anyway, I'll be back again next week, so thanks for watching everybody. Cheers then.